How to meaningfully inhabit a space. How to weave ourselves into a new territory. To think the project of human inhabitation in present times. The initial impulse for this season of Woods in the Sound is a personal, collective journey. A journey of foresta to become a real forest. Our search for spaces of the possible, to say it with Isabel Stengers, a search for making a home for a multispecies collective. So what can we learn from vernacular, contemporary, and emerging knowledges of spatial practices, as well as multilingual situated dialogues? Can architecture support multispecies conviviality? This season unfolds as a relational research as necessity, becoming a context for a collective sense-making, seeking vocabularies and articulating ideas that may enact ecologies of practice in our search for more inclusive and regenerative inhabitation.
Taking the planetary as our mode of inquiry, during this season we've been exploring some shared visions for reimagining the project of human inhabitation, shifting attention from the human to the terrestrial condition, and asking, how do we cohabit places guided by a vision of human activity in attentive coherence and balance with and within living ecologies as one complex, uninterrupted process? In this last episode of this season, we turn to material gestures and practices that suggest ways in which to rearticulate and reconfigure human-planetary relations in our efforts to make dwelling places. Asking, how can we build relationships through materials, with the place, with people, and expanding our notion of we with the multiplicities of other artisans of life, other beings, and emergent properties making life on this planet possible. How a material project becomes a project of connection.
I really believe in a material world. It's very necessary to talk and to deal with materials. I really believe that materials are heavy and should stay local, and people and ideas are light and should travel.
Personally, I don't like, or I get frustrated with this abstraction. It's not really knowing where who's involved with things, or where things come from, or what it means, all of these things. So if you look at the meat industry, I'm not a vegetarian, but sometimes I eat meat. But if you look at the meat industry, it's not transparent. You don't really know where all these things come from. And if you ever did, you probably wouldn't eat meat because you'd be kind of aghast at kind of what goes on behind the scenes, you know. And it's the same with building materials, you know. And it's where do these things come from? How are they extracted? What does it mean for the environment? All these questions are sort of taken out of the context in which and where the building is built, you know. Nobody's really ever thinking about that. Nobody's ever really thinking about where the marble come from, or what does it cost, or these types of things. So what I love about working on these types of projects is that you understand where it comes from, you know. You're there, you're looking at it. You're speaking with the person who's involved in it, you know. There's a traceability of everything. Whether things are bad or good, you can see that after, but at least you understand the different components that are sort of making these materials and these processes. Then on the kind of also on the kind of human side, if you're working with local manufacturers or local artisans or local industry, then you have that kind of immediate relationship with those things. So you have a completely different understanding of what is how do we physically manifest stuff in a building or in a design from a local region. You know, how do we do that, and what are the kind of implications of that? And you can't within architecture today, you really can't do that, you know. Architects can't do that. Patrons are not paid to do it. You don't have enough time or enough budget to really dig deep into the materials and really understand the implications of using certain things, you know. So it's those types of things which I really get me motivated to work in it, you know, and to see how you can, through looking at three different things, get a completely different outcome. One outcome that seems to make more sense than just buying something from a catalog and not really understanding the implications of these things.
We tend to specialize, while I really believe that the cross-pollination, so you have a fiber that you mix with lime and that you color with another plant and so on, creates already a kind of ecosystem in outside of the lab. And you do an acoustic board from rice, you do an acoustic board from sunflower, you do so you start also again to avoid monoculture. So everything what you do is trying to focus on diversity. A building with one kind of solution, because that is what architects and constructors like, one way of doing things, one way of doing that, are probably not the most resilient ones for themselves and for the environment. So you have to fundamentally change the system. That means not one material, not monoculture, polyculture, and really looking to the place and the situation, geological, and then thinking, how can I produce it locally?
I think my real focus and my concern is not is this human forest interaction, which you all will be testing, and at the scale of the mass urbanization that we're going to be seeing in the next 30 years, before we see a reduction of human population for whatever reason. I mean, that's what's projected. We're gonna unfortunately build a lot of stuff, and we're gonna do it out of materials that right now have enormous environmental impact, ecological impact. We don't think about it like when we think about cutting forests for wood for building. We worry about deforestation, you know, and overharvest at best. But we never look at the impacts of all the other things that we do to the land to get material to build with. And I choose building because I'm an architect, but I also realize just the sheer quantity, the sheer mass of consumption associated with making buildings has to play some role in this, massive human consumption that is part of our societies. And so what began as a sort of question about, wow, where did all the material come to build Tokyo? What hole in the ground was created, and what happened to all the biospheric material, all the biomass and flora and fauna above that hole in the ground, metaphorical hole in the ground, that created the largest stockpile of material in the world, the city of Tokyo. Pavement, structure, surfaces, glass, very little wood, actually, if you think about it. If you measure ecological impacts from we're using just carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas as a proxy for impact, whether it be biodiversity loss or human suffering, you start to see that this extractive economy to produce the buildings, the human settlement alone, has huge impacts. And that was never, ever considered. 10 years ago, we used to talk about this stuff and people were like, well, why do we care about that? It's all about energy consumption. And yet we kept seeing that when we were doing tests, that this consumption was of mineral-based fossil hydrocarbon fueled building material, that production phase was creating an enormous carbon spike and was probably doing damage to landscapes. How do we create, instead of this antagonistic relationship between cities and forests as a stand-in for all natural systems, could we create a symbiotic one where, even given the massive anticipated growth of population and urbanization, could that become an engine for regeneration? Could we take all the disturbed forests and try to incentivize their restoration, protection, biodiverse enhancement, rather than just neglect it, plantation forests, and then continue this really horrible and often at this point illegal logging that's going into other forests for whatever reason. So there we are. How do we create that synergy?
Hello. I'm in. We are woodworkers, so we want to work with wood as much as possible, and especially then when we start with the timber frame, and we really got into that because it's a great way to build. It's very fun and it's beautiful and everything, and we would love to just build the timber frames. The timber frame is thousands of years traditions in the frames. We've been building all the cathedrals, and every like wood structure is a timber frame structure before 1950s or something like that, and it's more or less bespoke joint systems and everything. And if you take that knowledge, and instead of just stop to develop, you just take it into our time and develop it with we have those awesome 3D software that we can use to develop the timber frame system, this very old craft, into our modern era of building. So we take like the good part of modern building, where you can really actually build a house in the computer before you do it for real, to solve all the problems. You can get very specific material lists. You have much less waste, and you can just make the process very much easier. So here we're building a timber frame house. It's like a semi-traditional. A timber frame can be quite contemporary in the design. You're quite free to explore whatever. And this is kind of like a showroom, garage, workshop, studio kind of house. This is pine. So out there was spruce on the log house, and that's what we have here mostly. And then the pine we get from a little further inland. It grows better there, and this very good quality. It's dense and a lot of core, so will last for hundreds of years, thousands of years. You can't get away from the cracks. So we usually say to our customers that it's a quality stamp with the cracks, because all timbers that's not processed, cut up and glued back together will when it dries from the outside, so it shrinks over the less dry core on the inside, so it has to crack. And it also makes timber twist and move a little bit, So it takes someone with some skills and with some mind to think, okay, how do I solve this? Since all timbers are unique, so you can't put it into a machine and get 100% 100 millimeter precision. So if you see cracks in the frame, it's massive timbers, and then you know it's a craftsman that built it.
So could the good people working in the forest who are trying to be responsive to forest needs and to restore forest health and expand forest cover, could architects and designers and engineers and manufacturers start to use the same sort of responsiveness to these different conditions and start to create a vast array of material opportunities that substitute for these homogeneous, easily understood, well funded systems of material production like concrete and steel and plastic, glass? How could we do that? And so that's the goal. Like, more specifically, if a forest is harvested for a certain reason over 10 years, there's a land management plan. You have 10 years of knowledge about how much material is coming out of that forest for good reason, for healthy reason, with which to respond given the amount and the type of material, the species of it, and create building solutions out of it. In the same way that all resources are going to change, and we don't have as much access to limestone maybe as we did, so we start to use other materials in concrete and making cements. We're already industry's already responsive. We just have to turn that responsiveness into benefit for the forest.
The forest grows and you can make building material from it or insulation from it. I mean, that's, for us, the more normal way of working. Or you dig clay out of the soil and you make a brick or a earth block or whatever it is. It's, for us, logical. Why would you go making insulation out of fossil fuels and then watching it set itself on fire one day eventually and release it all into the atmosphere? Never mind also the
even working with it to cut it up to make it fit in when you're building, you just
I have an aversion to this kind of plastic stuff, but also
that
the first project we did was a renovation of a really old building in Rotterdam, and it was full of mold. And you sort of saw over time, if you understand how buildings were built and the technical aspect of the longevity of how a building ages, if you mistreat it or you don't maintain it, you end up with a lot of problems down the line. And some of those problems are from using bad paints that don't allow moisture to pass through. And then when you think, oh, if just one or two layers of paint on a brick wall can cause so much damage, like imagine if you pack that brick wall in not only with paint but also insulation on the inside and then more paint. I mean, you're just sort of creating an unhealthy building, and you think, oh, I insulated it or whatever, but actually it's just getting worse and worse over time.
Yeah.
And the
your energy bill goes down, but your health bill goes up.
Yeah, but also the minute there is a leak somewhere, it has no chance to rectify itself, which is, I think, also important because the maintenance of buildings over the long term is usually where it goes wrong. And then we sort of started learning about these clay plasters and earth plasters and wood fiber insulations. And then it sort of all just clicked into place. And then when we did the new builds, we started looking into like, okay, if we're going to build with wood, how are we going to build it up like this? It becomes a sort of technical exercise to unlearn all the bad habits that have been developed in the last, 100 years, let's say. So this is the energy pyramid of different materials. So yeah, global warming potential. And here you see all the wood-based materials, and at the top, aluminum, zinc, copper, so embodied basically production, what it takes to produce different materials. you have to take into account, I'm not sure this one takes it into account, things that are recyclable, right? Like I said, all the
No.
metals are recyclable. So it takes a lot of energy to make them,
Yeah.
but they are recyclable better than other materials. So it's sort of, yeah, just interesting. I mean, these materials, because they're made out of bio-based, are actually carbon negative, 0 or negative, right? Because they're storing carbon. So, I mean, that's where it gets interesting, building buildings out of like mass pieces of wood instead of brick.
There are a lot of really great experiments going on with a vast range of materials. And I would say that the biggest misunderstanding of what we have worked on with respect to using forest products as a sort of immediate response to this carbon spike that's going on and the failure of forests is that people say, oh, these guys only want to make things out of wood, and that's not good. And that's a sort of childish and reductive response. It's really saying there are different tools that are appropriate at different times given how our response works to restore biodiversity and restore the climate. And it's going to change. In 30 years, we won't be using those same materials. We're going to need a new, more responsive set of techniques and tools and materials because it's a dynamic system. It's always going to be changing. We've left homeostasis on the planet. We're now in these sort of rapidly increasing cycles and downturns, potentially improvements using a specific set of responses. But this doesn't do well with capitalism, and that's another question that we have to address too. I appreciate that people have the freedom to make themselves, give themselves a better quality of life and things, but once it becomes a sort of centralized proposition, you lose that reflexive and reflective kind of inquiry that's cyclical and ever-changing dynamic. And we always risk the problem that once it becomes a successful business enterprise, that we have to then figure out ways to have a kill switch that stops it if it starts doing damage. And that's not so inspiring to investors. They want to know that they're going to get all their returns out of it, and that they don't have to change once we figured out the system and sunk our costs. So
for 5 years now, I've been into talking about regenerative building, circular economy, building with bio-based material, and so on, the future of landscape. I find it super interesting because I come from TV and theater and performing arts, but we were dealing with topics like the future of democracy and the future of society, and then suddenly we came into these new materials. So for me, talking about regenerative architecture should always come hand in hand with talking about social structures. In the way you do your coalitions to make the structures, in the way you do coalitions to keep the structures, in the way people find a place there. And then it becomes super interesting, because then you're talking about a circular society more than just an architecture or just one layer. What you see here is this is a house that is exploded, and then all rooms have a theme. So for example, this is very easy, the kitchen, the theme is food, or food waste. Now, in Holland we have a lot of milk residue. There's a lot of milk being thrown away. 1/3 of the milk just never gets drunk. So with the casein, which is the bacteria in milk, you can actually make bricks. So this is milk, right? Milk together, so it says milk together with a little bit of cedar to make it the color red, but it's milk. The floor is made out of eggs. So purely eggs, nothing else. Eggs, eggs, eggs. So 1 in 3 eggs has been thrown away, which is ridiculous. We never eat 1/3 of the eggs that chickens lay for us, right? And you can actually make with eggs beautiful materials. Of course, this is experimental, but I love it at the same time. Here we have beer residue. This is plate material, so this is like MDF. This is already on the market, like for real. MDF made out of residue of beer together with reed, and reed grows in water plants, which is very good because we have to have more water on our fields. So reed is very good for that. And the beer residue, because beer makers have a lot of residue and normally they have to pay to get rid of it. This is actually a company that uses them to make plate material, and look at these beautiful colors. This is fruit leather, of course, made from fruit. Well, the whole kitchen is an ode to reusing the waste streams of the food industry. Then here we talk about water. So this is mussels. This is beautiful a beautiful flooring made out of mussel shells, so the shell of mussels. And now actually they're doing this in parks also because it's very good with water. So it lets the water go through. This is mycelium, mushroom, of course. And the funny thing is, this people understand mushroom. It's almost like soundproof insulation. It's also been used for this. This is also, but this is 10% wood, 90% mushroom. So what you get is, you get almost like it's like a wooden frame, right? It looks like wood, but it's only 10% wood. It's wood chafers, so that what you throw away. So when you're done working with wood, you have a lot of pulp. So they use the pulp and they let the mycelium bind it again together to make cardboard material. And this one here is, you can't see it, but it's true. There's a fungi coating on this one. And the good thing is, a coating every year is just, I mean, the first year is the strongest, and every year it becomes weaker and weaker with a normal coating. With the fungi coating, every year it becomes stronger because the fungi is growing. So here, if you would destroy it, it grows naturally back. So this is wood with fungi. Every 7 years, every river, every canal has to be dragged, right? So because it becomes a lot of mud in it, right? So that drag is being used to make stones because they let the water through. So these stones, if you lay them, for example, in a terrace outside, now the problem is the rain falls on it, nothing goes through, and it goes away to the sewer. Here, the water can go in because it's made actually out of sludge, right? That is already water permeable. Okay? So this is concrete with bacteria in there, and the moment it cracks, the bacteria close it again. So it's living concrete, but it's concrete without cement. And we started this project, 1/3 of all the material was already in the gamma, and I mean like in a big warehouse. You could, but not literally in the gamma, but you can buy it like on big scale. 1/3 directly from the producer, 1/3 is innovative. We call it today, tomorrow, and the future, right? That was in 2020. Now 50% of what you see here is already available on big scale, 30% directly and 20% future. So it is reusable, but also compostable if you do it properly. I like the idea that I don't see any bad in bio-based materials, any negative aspects, except if we're gonna mass produce them and tire the soil even more. So if you put the right amount of bio-based, wood is also bio-based materials, on the right soil, and you think of it as a ecosystem the way you produce them, then it's amazing.
At Bauhaus Earth, where we're right now, colleagues are developing earth blocks from mining waste and construction excavation waste. And it has no cement in it. It's not fired in a kiln. It's just basically hardened based on the chemical composition of the minerals that are in it, clays, loams, and things like that. And they've gotten a certification, a DIN certification, that allows them to build a 3-story building out of it with no cement. And they're developing now earth-based mortar for the bricks, and they're testing in different spots. And the interesting thing about that is that it's a plentiful resource that's coming out of human activity rather than coming out of some natural system. So we could dig up a lot of clay and fire it into bricks, but we wouldn't be solving the problem. We might be taking liberties with a critical resource. We're using huge energy inputs to process these things, and we're transporting them probably great distances, maybe, and creating some toxicity in the process. What we really need to do is do what my friends Christian and Misha are working on with their earth blocks, which are saying, look at the entire cycle. And then that sort of virtuous cycle of saying, we're using human waste, human material waste to create constructive materials and products. If you look at the sort of flywheel that creates, you're also starting to say, well, this isn't an opportunity just to scale manufacturing. What you're really doing is looking at the makeup of different soils in different places, say around Brandenburg, and looking at different landowners and people who are doing different kinds of work that might be producing this. And there might be the possibility of a more distributed economy rather than a centralized one that engages people in rural areas and also urban areas and provides access to employment opportunity and enterprise opportunity. And then you also look at essentially how at the end of the building life cycle, you're also taking this earth. I mean, they can basically make a brick, and if it has any flaws, they just smash it up again and start again and make a new brick.
How can we, again, like take care of each other and of the places we are in and of our environments by switching how we maybe see value in things? I got to know the notion of care because I was doing my diploma about drugs and architecture. Like, around heroin or this kind of drugs, there is a lot of notion about like care, like how you cannot maybe make someone stop doing something, but how you can make sure that they do it in a safe way, that they're not going to get an overdose, that they can go out of it if they want, that they understand their possibilities. So how you can, instead of just, being like putting a big stop, like we shouldn't do things like that, just explore like how can we make sure that there is like care around that person. And that's how I started to read about care. And I was really fascinated by this notion of care is not necessarily stopping someone doing something that you don't want them to do, but how you can protect. And related to architecture, it's also this thing that how can we, maybe we're not gonna do something, as you said, that is like fixed, but how we can accept all of this. Maybe this material is not perfect, but we have to accept all of its facets, and how we can make sure that it is, around it. Or a building that, I'm thinking a lot about concrete these days, like, and maybe concrete, we see it in Norway, like brutalism, for example, is really hated. But how can we say, okay, this thing is there, maybe not everyone likes it, but how can we appreciate the quality? How can we take care of it? And for me, this notion of care was really new in that sense of not necessarily going against the flow or the building, but going with and like being a supportive aspect of it. The best reuse is within the building you're in, right? And then maybe ask the neighbors or the community around if there is things to reuse. And
what's quite interesting about that is when you try to rather see like what kind of materials are accessible, you also can start to think differently about what materials you actually can use and how you use them, and what kind of expressions or aesthetics or things like that, also that you can start to value in a different way, and think again like a bit more playful about what is the cladding, what is it used for, where do you need it, do we need as much cladding everywhere around the house, or do we want to have another type of cladding in the south facing wall? Like all of these things, it can be a bit more, it opens doors to kind of think differently about what the materials are and how they can be used. If you kind of bring it to a big aspect of like, what are we doing with materials and the things that we build around us, we have this tendency of thinking that things are just going to be like what they are always and not decaying. And especially when you're talking about natural materials, it's nice that the things around us are living and we're taking care of this. In this taking aspect, we're taking care of our things and we're valuing the things and we're valuing the environment around us. And if we're expecting everything to not need that, maybe we're lacking some sort of attitude towards how we're a part of something bigger. And I think that's what's good about maybe having to take care or dealing with decay, and trying to see it as not something negative but something positive.
A building is a living element. A garden is a living element, and it's going to be life in it, and life and movement is important. If there is no life and movement, it's dead, and we don't want that.
Different materials have a fundamentally different impact on your body physically. How you breathe, how you sleep, how you eat. It's healthy. We don't live in plastic bags. But that is what contemporary buildings are. They're plastic bags. So that means that you're fundamentally, by aesthetics, by beauty, very important, are part of that environment. That is what architecture can do.
I like to design public buildings where really that have some gravity, that people can come in and get convinced also, because they can experience the mud as a material, which is not so easy otherwise, is of course something that I really like to do. But I wouldn't mind building a skyscraper right in the middle of Manhattan. No, really, just imagine it's all steel and glass, and it all kind of looks the same, and it's not something you want to touch actually. Yeah. And then suddenly you have whoosh, an earth shoot coming out of the ground. How powerful that would be. And we hardly have contact to earth anymore, and humankind grew up with this material in such a close connection. Now we don't have it almost. I mean, we have it maybe as dirt on the soles of our shoes, or maybe in the flower pot, but no real connection anymore. And what I have seen in many projects, like when the earth walls are standing, especially at the project that we did in Harvard, the Graduate School of Design, it was totally grey, the mud. It looked like a concrete wall, but people were constantly, touching the wall. And I thought, hey, you wouldn't touch a concrete wall all the time just by passing by and intuitively, on a phone, and then suddenly whatever. And I understood that there must be some archaic connection between human beings and this material, and that's fascinating. And I think especially, if you get children into contact with this material from early age on, then they have a different feeling for, also how good you feel in this rooms. My daughter, for example, we lived for 1 year. We have about I think 6 tons of mud also in our home, and when we moved to the States for a year, that we lived in a normal house, and she almost couldn't stand it because she wasn't used to it, the dryness, every surface was sealed and everything, and it didn't feel good. And I think if you understand this as a small child, it already shapes you. Also with materials, the mud is everywhere different. There's no place where you have the same mud, and so there's no pattern that you can sell. It's different with the concrete, and also with the concrete you can build in the wet climate the same way as in a hot climate. It's just not vulnerable to the rain. And when you have the mud, it's vulnerable and it's always different. Then there's no standardization possible. You have to react on it, and it's people who react on it, and that creates the life. I would like to really implement things that I learned in Bangladesh also in our culture, because I think it's important not just to go and this old colonialistic feeling to go somewhere and do something better, but I think it's also really important to meet on an eye level and then bring it also back to our context. And I think it's very important. And it makes sense because it doesn't matter how much money you have, or how lucky you were to live in a more rich part of the world. It doesn't matter. We all have local resources, and we are one planet. We are one humankind. We are, it doesn't matter, how much financial power I have. I think we have all the same responsibility, and it's not just a burden. It really kind of steers my creativity, to do something, just out of what you have, and that creates our cultural diversity, and I think this makes our planet also beautiful.
Das finde ich eigentlich gerade an Lehm so spannend, dass es so ursprünglich ist, dass man es aus der Erde holt und man hat im Grunde schon sein Baumaterial im besten Falle fertig, und im schlimmsten Fall muss man noch ein bisschen beimischen oder ein bisschen optimieren, aber man hat im Prinzip einen fertigen Baustoff, und ich sehe darin einfach ein Riesenpotenzial, Dinge wieder zu vereinfachen. Lehm ist auch einfach ein Material, was sich toll anfasst und mit dem man gut arbeiten kann. Also es gibt Materialien, die sind auf Chemiebasis, da muss man sich schützen, da muss man aufpassen, eine Schutzbrille tragen, aufpassen, dass man nichts an die Hände kriegt. Und das ist halt bei Lehm alles nicht der Fall, sondern wenn man mit Lehm arbeitet, hat man eigentlich hinterher gesündere Haut als vorher. Und es ist einfach ein total tolles Material, um damit zu bauen.
Ein Großteil deines Lebens lebst du dann in diesem Haus. Und das muss gesund sein, das muss gesund auch für Allergiker sein. Es muss ansprechende Farben haben, wo man sich wohlfühlt. Und das kann man mit diesen Naturmaterialien gut erreichen.
Ästhetik auch, die es mit sich bringt, also die Oberflächen, die man nicht unbedingt beim Lehmputz beispielsweise mehr streichen muss, sondern so lassen kann, wie sie sind. Also es ist sowas sehr Ursprüngliches und das finde ich toll daran. Also es geht da nicht nur darum, was verbraucht ein Haus an Heizenergie im Betrieb, sondern eben auch, was verbraucht das Haus schon im Bauen und was spart man sozusagen schon an Energie, dadurch, dass man wenig Energie zum Beispiel in das Brennen eines Steines oder in das Brennen von Zement gesteckt hat. Also diese ganzen Vorprozesse. Und da hat Lehm den Vorteil, dass es eben ein Material ist, was mehr oder weniger unverändert verbaut wird. Also das Einzige, was man macht, ist vielleicht ein paar Zuschlagstoffe beimischen, also Kies und Steine, Splitt, vielleicht ein bisschen Sand und an und für sich ist es das Einzige, was man aber sonst hinzufügt, Wasser und dann trocknet es einfach wieder. Es ist halt wahnsinnig gut recycelbar. Man kann Lehm sozusagen unstabilisiert, was die bessere Form ist, immer wieder weich machen und damit was Neues bauen. Und wenn so ein Haus abgerissen wird und man hat den Putz, oder in dem Fall sind es ja jetzt Stampflehmwände, und dann zerkleinert die, könnte man die einfach aufs Feld werfen und das Haus ist wieder in der Natur. Und das ist halt etwas, was natürlich eine fantastische Eigenschaft irgendwie ist, die kaum ein anderes Material so gut kann.
Und ich denke, so alle 6 oder 7 Jahre müssen die dann auch so ein bisschen erneuert werden. Und das meine ich auch mit so Pflege. Man muss dann auch solche Häuser, solche Gebäude dann auch pflegen. Und auch man kann hier auch diese schönen Geschichten hier, die mit der Zeit kommen, die Rissbildung, das kann man eben halt auch alles wieder so reparieren. Ja.
Es ist ein robustes Material, was sich auch gut reparieren lässt. Also Lehmputz hat vielleicht eine etwas geringere Festigkeit als andere Putze, die aber absolut ausreichend ist für alle Zwecke, die in den Putz eben so erfüllen muss. Aber der Vorteil ist eben, kleine Schadstellen lassen sich halt viel leichter reparieren. Das macht ihn ja letztlich auch nachhaltig in einer Weise, in der man sagen kann den immer wieder zu neuem Leben sozusagen.
Si hablamos de arquitectura para una habitabilidad a escala planetaria, creo que la clave es el equilibrio con el entorno natural y con otras especies. Entonces, para esto, pues yo creo que hay que mirar hacia atrás, mirar hacia las arquitecturas vernáculas previas a la industrialización, donde se empleaban recursos naturales del entorno y no se generaban residuos. Estamos hablando de materiales biodegradables digamos que tenían muy poco impacto en el entorno, ¿no? Esto cambió con la modernidad, con los procesos industriales y los materiales contemporáneos, y está claro que tenemos que volver a un esquema de ciclo cerrado que de alguna manera va a permitir pues esos equilibrios de los que hablábamos, ¿no? Estamos hablando de materiales pues eso, como la tierra, la madera, las fibras vegetales, que bueno, la clave es también que adaptar de alguna manera estos materiales y estas técnicas a las exigencias y a las normativas actuales, que no están reñidos en ningún caso con el confort en los edificios, pero desde luego la clave es partir pues eso, de esos materiales que estuvieron presentes en los patrimonios culturales de cada una de las regiones y que ahí están un poco las claves de las estrategias de cara a futuro. Entonces, hasta ahora en la balanza han pesado las virtudes, entre comillas, de los materiales industriales, pues yo que sé, bajo costo, rapidez de puesta en obra y demás, ¿no? Pero no se ha tenido en cuenta pues esta gran problemática que tienen, ¿no? Que son materiales muy agresivos. Bueno, podríamos hacer una metáfora con las personas y las amistades, ¿no? Conoces una persona que tiene grandes virtudes, pero tiene un defecto que es agresivo y violento, ¿no? Pues para mí esto es un poco lo que está ocurriendo con el tema de los materiales. Tienes que decidir si esa amistad te merece la pena o no, la verdad. Y claro, cuando hablamos de materiales locales, pues eso tiene una conexión también con el territorio, ¿no? Porque si tenemos un material en el entorno de la obra, pues va a haber un diálogo también entre digamos, el paisaje y esa nueva construcción, ¿no? Es mucho más fácil que se integre, va a haber lógicas un poco también de identidad cultural asociada a unos sistemas y a unas técnicas locales, ¿no?
We have to change the culture of making thought. And all of the criteria that you use as a designer, a design thinker, to make decisions. And one of the things we always talk about in architecture and training about construction science is we look at materials, means, and methods. And I always wanted to say, yeah, materials, means, methods, and impacts. Like, what are the consequences of materials, means, and methods? To develop, exactly as you say, a regionally specific understanding of material resources, human culture, political economic structures, climate impacts that are affecting these places immediately, and to try to put them into a new algorithm for how we respond so that the demands of building are actually a motivating force for climate restoration, for ecosystem enhancement and biodiversity enhancement, which is a really big concept because it's hard to describe exactly how that would work and how you'd measure it. But I think that has to be a motivating factor, which is that, it's not enough in the old sort of Hippocratic model of sustainability to do no harm. Now we have to work to actively reduce and reverse the effects of what we do and use this massive consumption to be the engine of that. And every way we look at a material, we're looking at it in terms of this systemic implication, potential consequence, potential benefit, and try to toggle that. And so far we've found, with what we think are pretty thorough analyses, a few solutions, but they're, as you say, extremely specific to place, culture, climate, terrain. All of these things change.
So we're not at the minute in the space what we call the Agora. So it's a sort of central, let's say, public space of Le Magasin Lettrique, which is the sort of building of Atelier Luma. So the building where we used to do our research, experimentations, and all of these types of things. So this central space is where we, at the minute, we kind of collect, let's say, ongoing research. So on the few tables that you'll see around, there's certain types of samples with mycelium or Aleppo pine wood, Korean oyster brick. There's some work with local textiles and dyes. And then we have some elements of the presentation of the building itself. Today we kind of talk a lot about the biorealism approach, how this approach to design, to architecture, to thinking can, let's say, enable different ways of doing things. So what we had set up as a primary objective was to sort of take this space as an example, as a prototype. Every building is a prototype because you normally only make one. Sometimes with housing you make more, but normally you make one. But this in the sense of a prototype for bioregional architecture. So taking it as a case study, one, because it's a renovation, and two, then we can take in all of these things that have been learned, add new things, and then see whether or not the region within a kind of 70-kilometer radius could provide the materials and the expertise for completely redeveloping the building. So things that we concentrated on quite early were, let's say, getting a series of materials kind of, let's say, secured. So we were looking at kind of bio-waste from farming and agricultural byproducts like the rice straw, like sunflower, different parts of the sunflower plant. There's a lot of, let's say, stone industry within the region. So looking at stone waste, whether it be stone dust or kind of small aggregates from stone. There's also there's some sand extraction that goes on. So we were looking at type of co-products that come out of this kind of sand industry. One Korean example had sort of 5,000 tons of, let's say, clay waste or a clay type material that they saw as a waste. So looking at things like this and how that could then be brought back into the building itself. The entire building is insulated in rice straw. So the walls are just kind of bale. So that's kind of put in very within a kind of frame, and then you kind of fill it up. And this is sort of how you go. And we used a rice straw panel on the roof. So we had to sort of remake the roof, take off the tiles, insulate it because it was exposed and things like this. So with the tiles, for example, there was 40% that couldn't be reused. They're 140 years old tiles, so actually there's 60% that are still on the roof and growing strong. But 40% we had to kind of take off. So some of them we crushed. They were in the facade as an aggregate material, and some of them they're in the actual floor. For the round earth, as I mentioned, so it looks a bit like concrete. It's quite a beige. It's quite clear, quite grey. But one of the main materials used in this is stone dust as a kind of fine aggregate replacement for sand. There is some sand in it. Also, there's also recycled building rubble, so crushed into different aggregates and then reused in this. And then the binder, which is just a clay. So it's around 10-12% of clay, which acts as the sort of structural binder. So there's no some cement or there's no lime in it. It's not stabilized, it's unstabilized. Apart from the first two layers where you see this, it's almost comes up pink in the first two layers, whereas lime has been added to the external, which gives just a bit of extra protection against when it's clean. A mop comes and these types of things. It just protects it a little bit more than leaving it unstabilized. So that was a bit of a choice that we made. And then also the raw earth bricks form these, let's say, the upper floors. So it's based a little bit on the same recipe, but different types of grain sizes for the rubble and for the stone dust. And then that shows a kind of different way of, let's say, interpreting and making different materials from these kind of identical waste streams themselves. On top of the rice straw bale, we've done a range of kind of earth plasters. Here they're kind of finished finished flat, but they contain quite a lot of fibers and small kind of, it's called sunflower marrow. It's like sort of popcorn material. So it helps it give it a more kind of acoustic finish. When we see the next space, it's much different. It's an acoustic plaster, and the finish we have left almost untreated in a way, so it has this sort of dippled and acoustic effects. Now you probably can see this very well, but yeah, here also you have one of the kind of algae plastics sort of coming back that we used in the tower. So using it in let's say a fitting for a door handle, and seeing if it can also have this sort of application. These are things we just added because we wanted to test a different use. So if I'm going to open the door here, if you watch, and yet then on the other side we have the salt. So it's looking at two kind of let's say door handles from the Camargue. So one is salt, and then the other at the front is an algae plastic. We sort of made this map after we had actually constructed the building, but it takes 8 materials. So we actually ended up developing around 18 unique materials for this building. Of here we focus on 8. So looking at rammed earth, looking at raw earth brick, the earth type plasters, the 3 different types of panels that we developed from sunflower or rice waste. And that kind of clay waste that I spoke about before became the ceramic tiles that we used in bathroom areas, kitchen areas, and then staining on woods. So within these 8, then we kind of show on a map where everything came from. Whether it's the people engaged in processing or making the material, or whether it's the material themselves. So it becomes a little bit of a passport, let's say, a passport for the building, so you can understand each element in these ways. And we're also interested in what it means as a kind of, I'd say, a social instrument, or what does it mean as a kind of cultural instrument? Because when you're inside this building, you can see the stone dust, you can see the concrete rubble from building waste, you can see the old roof in the floor, you can see the rice from the Camargue, you can see the sunflower from the Camargue. So when you're in it, it becomes more cultural, because then you're kind of seeing the landscape reflected quite literally within the building, so you understand something about what it is around versus what it is inside, and how those things can, let's say, have an influence on each other. And we have an approach which is really like investigation, design, implementation, and transmission. So the transmission one is quite important because we try and find ways to share the projects, whether it's through actual educational programs, or whether it's through these kind of social insertion programs. So when you're building something, you can use these social insertion programs to kind of then take on and include within the processes a population of people that normally wouldn't really be working on these things. So we try and do like practical ways within inside a project of how you can do it, but we're definitely not just concerned with this carbon pollution element. It's important to include it within these other things, but if we just look at this, it's very it's not deep enough. And one of the issues that we have is kind of this abstraction, because we don't understand where our iPhone was built, or we don't understand where food comes from, or these kind of, we're almost being disconnected. So it's important to sort of focus on these things and show and show where these things are coming from, and how I can understand these processes. Because in a sense, it kind of empowers you then to make your own, to react to it or something like this. It's not just a kind of scientific number that is hard to kind of comprehend at a human level.
Personally, I think I worked a lot on projects that try to do alternatives to existing systems, which I think is derive a lot of learnings from that, of what's possible. But I think if you try to do systemic change, given the time pressure that we have, and climate change acting very fast, I think we're way past the point where we can tackle it. We have to more deal with it. So it's more about adjustment. But still, it's going very fast. The changes are happening very fast. And I think in order to systemically kind of deal with those things, I think we need to, or I feel like you need to work with the established systems that have partially contributed to the problems that we are facing now. So, in short, large-scale companies also. And I think it's more about working with them also and try to find ways collaboratively on how the systems that are at B, how they could slowly reformulate, bend and mold into what needs to be done. And I think for the B of Ubiquity, at least for me very personally, is perhaps the next opportunity to play a role in that. We're not by any means saving the world or creating a recipe for how to do it, but it's one angle, I think. And I think also this sort of network approach of trying to collaborate amongst different sectors, different industries, finding common language, finding ways for how to come together, how to communicate with one another. It's a very underestimated, I think, challenge. It's not a problem, it's a challenge. And I think speaking about all of that, I think it also, at least for me personally, but I think also for a lot of the students that are here now, it opens up also, let's call it, new job opportunities within the future that we're facing. We're not just educating architects to go into offices and to build the exact same stuff that we're building today. We're educating, or educating is maybe also a difficult word. I'm also learning all the time. I'm also educating myself through them, because they know certain things that I would never think of, and vice versa. So we also try to communicate a bit that we're all biofabricants. So we're this kind of group, now we're this kind of movement, which is per se interdisciplinary, but we don't have to say you're an architect, you're a designer, you're a biologist, you're this and that. But we're more in this kind of situation where we all strive towards a certain direction, and then see what comes out of that. And through this kind of interdisciplinarity per se, new job descriptions for the future come out. So
I really believe in thinking in. I know it's a it's a human measurement, because timelines are for all the species different, to think in 7 generations. It's very interesting when you do that for a forest and the life in a forest. And so if you live with the forest, if you think about all the actions you do and you think about them, what are the consequences and the implications in 7 generations? I think that is something we should do more, and we would. I think that is really the chance that we have now to rethink it and to create that kind of examples.
Nurturing imaginaries of architecture as a hopeful practice to grow our capacities for attentiveness and choice, spaciousness and repair, maintenance and care. Nurturing imaginaries of architecture as a hopeful practice to grow our capacities for attentiveness and choice, spaciousness and repair, maintenance and care. For a more regenerative multispecies collectivity to become possible, and for architecture to be a rehearsal room for a transformation towards a new tale of the living.